to someone who will lead the club for at least a decade and provide great successes that all the fans and everybody in Toronto can be proud of. I would like to say that thanks again for coming today. It's great to be here, and I look forward to working with you all in the future.
We'll take your questions again. Please wait for the microphone.
Richard, in the front here, if you could go back over the last week and look at the way that John's situation was handled, would you change anything in the way that he was let go?
I wish it did not get the same publicity, but the truth of the matter is we're still a competitive team. We have been, lots of ups and downs. And during that time, I was in close conversation with John. He knew what I was thinking. He knew some of the dates that we were thinking of for review. And in the end, when we started moving towards a decision, there is a process that has to be followed. I had to request approval to talk to Cliff, then the negotiations have to be done. So it's just the nature of the business that's what we had to go through, but I kept John really appraised.
Question for either Richard or Cliff. What is the job status of Paul Maurice right now?
I'll say, and I'll turn it over to Cliff. Cliff's going to be the hockey guy, so he's going to answer all the hockey questions today. I've talked to Paul. You'll hear from him at 2 o'clock today. Right now he's our coach, but you know, Cliff and/or the new replacement will ultimately make that decision, and Paul understands that. Cliff, anything you want to add to that?
Yes, Pierre. Paul Maurice is the coach of the Toronto Maple Leafs. He will be the coach for the balance of this year, as will the assistant coaches that work with him.
Richard, considering your history in these dealings and considering Cliff's history in hockey, why don't you put Cliff on the search committee and remove yourself?
As the CEO, I believe as part of my role is to pick out senior executives. I've got Gordon Kirk to help me. Cliff's going to focus on the team. At the same time, he's very available to be a resource.
Richard, you talked about the new person coming in being both an expert builder for the future and a short-term fixer. Aren't those divergent goals, and doesn't that premise set one up for failure from the start if you're looking at building for the future and short-term fixes?
In business today, you have to be a bit of both, and in sports, you have to be a bit of both. Cliff's going to set us up for, as he said, he's going to analyze the team. He doesn't have a point of view on it now that he's comfortable speaking about. Again, he can re-emphasize that, but he'll prepare us for the new person. So that's, you know, the short term, and he may have to do more than that. And then long term, you know, turning this team around will go to the new individual.
Hi, Cliff and Rich. This is really for both of you. Cliff, you mentioned 19 months, sort of a number that comes out of nowhere. But are you looking beyond that? Would you like to be in the role? You always use Scotty Bowman as an example, as someone who can be the person that ideas can be bounced off of long term until you decide to retire. And Richard, is that something that you're looking at as well as a possibility, although you've only committed to the 19 months?
Howie, 19 months is a fair term. And, you know, I think it would depend as we go forward what my contributions would be if I was on board and if they were necessary. I'm fully aware of that. And, but I'm happy to be back at this type of press conference. When I was introduced in 1991 as the president and GM of the Leafs, I said I was very fortunate to have started my career with the Montreal Canadiens and hopefully end it with the Toronto Maple Leafs. Well, that didn't happen 10 years ago, but it's going to happen this time.
Cliff gives us his experience, in this contract that we've done, gives us the luxury of conducting an absolutely thorough search. We're going to go out and get the right man for the job, and we have time to do that.
Richard, and I guess maybe Cliff, was the Raptors' model for success with Brian and Wayne followed in this process, and the portfolio that Cliff will have in terms of maybe preparing things for his successor as Wayne did for Brian?
Well, it is kind of coincidental. About 2 years ago at this time, we elected to make a change in mid-season. We put out the shingle. We're surprised that Brian was available. We were fortunate to get Brian. I'd like to think lightning will strike twice, but at the same time, we won't rush to fill this. We're going to get the right person. And when that person comes in, like Brian, they will be president, and like Brian, will build their own team.
Cliff, what are your thoughts on the lineup as it sits right now?
Well, it's a team that's trying hard to compete for a playoff spot. There are 7 teams in their category that are within 6 points of each other, with 33 games left to play. So we all know the history the last 2 years, missing the playoffs by 2 points one year and 1 point the other. But the question you ask yourself is that good enough? And the answer is obvious, it isn't. I mean, the key here is to develop a team that will have the capability of competing with the top teams in the league, as I alluded to a few moments ago. And so that means the team's going to have to be improved. Now, unfortunately today, the situation in running a hockey club is not like it was prior to the lockout. Prior to the lockout, the affluent teams in the league pretty well had a captive market as far as free agents went. And as an organization, if you struggled or made poor draft choices or didn't develop a lot of your own young players, you could camouflage that if you had the money to spend by adding a couple extra free agents. Today, if you want to compete, you have to draft well and you have to develop your own core of young players. Last year in the league, 27 of the 30 teams were within 10% of the cap. That means you have 3 and 4 times the number of teams being legitimate contenders to sign free agents than before the lockout. So while each team may get its share of 1 or 2 free agents or 3 with a cap system, you have to have that base of solid young players that you draft and develop yourself. That's the only way you're going to get some sort of sustainable success in a league now today that's pretty well designed for teams not to be able to be on top too long, but supposedly you're not supposed to be down too long either.